Good afternoon. Welcome to the FHL podcast. Sorry, I hear myself. Welcome to the JB show on the FHL network. My name is JB, James Fauntleroy. If you're nasty, and I have with me Kobe from Pro Peace Rapport joining me today. It is so good to see you, my friend. Um,
Good
and
to see you
how
too. It's been how long now? I think we talked in June, July.
shit has it been that long?
Yeah, time flies, right?
Yeah,
I'm in
time
a
flies
completely
when you're
different
fighting
country now.
imperialism.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just it's crazy, man. Because I mean, um, we're still. I mean, we'll be touching on one of the similar subjects today about Assange, but uh, you know, there's a lot that has been happening lately in the news, and you're a citizen journalist, independent, who covers a lot of these different issues. Um, and even though you're abroad right now in a little bit of a better situation than the rest of us, I should say.
a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
The student
Um,
debt follows me here, though.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Ooh,
I'm
yikes.
only gonna have like $20,000 this year in loans, and that's what I got to make stretch for a year, unless I get a job here. So
Ah,
I have to work
yeah,
in.
yeah, that sucks.
Mm.
Unfortunately, that's the way it is. But I want to give a hello to everybody in the chat before we get started. Noli D, yes, nerd love is the best love. Hearts and
Oh yeah,
live long and prosper. Uh,
hardcore nerds.
human love, solidarity. Good to see you. War deer. Yep, these guys. Damn right. Hey, Gene. See the change. Hello. Uh,
Hair looks great on both sides. Thank you, thank you.
yeah, yep, yep. We got our kitchen done. Okay. Pirate. Nice. Let me see. Quaker socialists.
Oh, hey
Uh,
Quaker.
yep. The lovely Quaker
See you
socialists.
everywhere.
Yep. Eric, so nice to have you. Everybody, come on in. It's the water's fine. Um, Kobe.
Yes, JB. What do we want to start with today? We want to start with the budget reconciliation backpedaling that
Oh,
we're actively seeing at the moment.
do you want to start with that debacle, that cluster F? I'm gonna try to censor myself right now because I'm trying to keep things monetized. But you want to start off with that one?
Does the F word really demonetize you on here?
No, but if you do it within like the first like 30 seconds of it, then it
Mm.
has an effect. But I'm trying to keep it as PG as possible just to keep the monetization going because unfortunately YouTube doesn't like us already as it is. Like for instance, they put a strike on Robert Durden already, so he wasn't allowed to stream for a week, as well as Franco from Frank Analysis, he wasn't allowed to as well, and
Yeah.
they demonetized him completely. So
Mm.
they're really coming after us, and even
Well, good thing you're on Rockfin too, then.
yeah, of course. Yeah,
For
we are
backup.
definitely on Rockfin. We are also live on Rockfin right now. Anybody who's watching on Rockfin, welcome, welcome to see you. Um, but yeah,
Tell Rockfin
uh,
to let me make videos. They haven't approved my request yet.
well, yeah, Rockfin, come on, get on it, man.
Yeah. Come on, I want to
Um,
get off of YouTube.
yeah, yeah. These people, these uh, fascistic qualities. Um, so yeah, the budget reconciliation.
Yeah. It's
Um,
been crazy. They're backpedaling from, I think there was the 12 weeks of paid leave that was in the original 3.5 trillion version of the bill. Now they're
mhm,
potentially talking about lowering that down to 4 weeks, which would be like the lowest in the OECD. So the organization that has all of the developed countries in the world, that would be the lowest, even though we're the richest country in the history of the world. We have the healthcare. They're talking about Medicare expansion being taken out of the reconciliation bill. I covered
I
that on
saw
my
that.
video yesterday,
I
where
saw
it was
that.
like because Joe Manchin and because Kyrsten Sinema are saying that basically we don't want this in the bill, we're not willing to put that in the bill. And Bernie and Pramila Jayapal had said 2 weeks ago, they said it's not negotiable. Medicare expansion for hearing, dental, and vision needs to be in the bill. But now we hear a little bit of a changing of tone. I watched a video of Pramila Jayapal like 2 or 3 days ago where she had said, "Oh, Biden, the inspirer in chief, the closer, closing us down from $3.5 trillion down to $1.75 trillion. I trust him." And it's like, how do you trust him when he went out on a CNN town hall and said, "Oh, well, Mr. Manchin and Miss Sinema, they don't want Medicare expansion in the bill, so it's not really realistic at this point."
You know what gets me mad? The fact that two people can take away benefits from the entire country.
Yeah. When it's popular benefit.
What does that sound like to you?
Not democracy.
No.
What's crazy is that they have two people, but if we had Bernie Sanders, if we had the squad, if we had the 117 co-sponsors for Medicare for All in the House, if they were acting like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but for the popular policies, I mean, we would have the leverage that we need. We could have our own Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema of the left, and then Joe Biden would be forced to go on the CNN town hall and say, "Oh, well, Bernie says he's not going to support the bill unless it has this in it." But he would, but we know that's not how it would play out in reality, right? If Bernie or any of the squad were to actually do that and take that firm of a stance, Biden and the centrists would start attacking them and start portraying it as if they're holding up legislation, they're preventing the American people from getting the care that they need, when they're really fighting for the American people to get more. They're fighting for the American people to really get the care that they need, but they're not doing that.
Okay, first of all, let's go, Brandon. By the way,
yeah, let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. And look, I find it hilarious that some people are so against forcing the vote and saying it doesn't work, but clearly it works for Manchin and Sinema.
Yeah.
If it works for them, why won't it work for us?
And my whole thing is so I had somebody who I'm actually going to be debating tomorrow on my stream. So this random DSA person, I want to say from Michigan, his name is Steven, I think.
Okay.
We had a kind of heated conversation on Twitter where he called me a forced to vote nerd because I think that they should be fighting for healthcare more adamantly. He basically said, "Oh, DSA needs to get anything they can possibly get out of the Democrats." And my whole point is, you're playing the Democrats' game if you're saying that. If you're saying that we only should be fighting for what the Democrats are willing to give us, you're saying that you're just indistinguishable from them. You're saying that we are the Democrats at that point. And it's like, to call us forced to vote nerds, when it's like, if we had done forced to vote in January now, 10 months ago, and we had a whole national conversation for a whole month, and let's just say the forced to vote failed. They actually forced the vote, but it didn't pass. Medicare for All didn't pass. They could keep harping on that same line for the entire year. So now, when we're talking about Medicare expansion being taken out of the reconciliation bill, how could you take it out if we're not starting from a position of compromise? The House progressives did that. Instead of fighting for Medicare for All, they started from the position of, we're supporting Biden's agenda. We're supporting just expansion around the edges. But if they had been taking the hard line stance of Medicare for All the entire time, the compromise would be the public option. It wouldn't even be Medicare expansion just for hearing, dental, and vision. It wouldn't just be lowering the Medicare age to 60, which is 5 years higher than what Hillary Clinton was promising in 2016. So we're to the right of 2016 on healthcare, and it's because they're being incrementalist.
Yeah, and that incrementalism is showing itself in such poor ways now. I had a thought in my head, and it just kind of slipped away.
It'll come back.
But, yeah, it'll come back. They always come back. Ooh, made myself cough right there. I was so great, I choked up on myself.
You're gonna give me COVID across the ocean.
Yeah. So, but the thing about this whole thing, they could have been a lot more vocal about it, but it shows that there's no sense of urgency. And so a lot of people who call us, forced to vote nerds or whatever they call them, it's silly because why? First of all, it came back. People need to realize this about forced to vote. It failing to pass Medicare for all was always a part of the strategy.
Exactly. It's about replacing the people who are against it.
Yeah. The rule, that was going to be the rule. And us winning it getting on the floor was the exception. So therefore, for us to sit here and go, oh, but it's going to fail. Exactly. That's part of the strategy to eventually get it passed within a couple years instead of decades from now. That was the thing.
Mm.
But instead, people are so short-sighted and thinking, oh, it's going to fail as soon as it gets on the floor. Yeah, it's going to fail as soon as it gets on the floor. And then guess what we're going to do? We're going to hammer away at every single person that voted against it, even people who said that they co-sponsored it, but they didn't vote for it. Guess what? We're now going to know who they are, and we're going to go up against them. But guess what? They didn't want to do that because they didn't want to go up against Mama Bear. And so now look, now we have a reconciliation bill which there's some and ha's over whether we should keep the Medicare expansion in, which I would personally benefit from because I have Medicare. I would like dental, I would like vision, I would like hearing, I would like those things. I don't want to have to go to Medicaid and then maybe have to pay another copay outside of that just to be able to get my teeth looked at or my eyes. In fact, let me go on this rant right quick. Why in the hell is it that our eyes, our teeth, and our ears are separate from the rest of our body? What sense does that make? It doesn't make any sense.
And they claim they care about our health. They say, oh, these vaccine mandates are necessary because we want everybody to be healthy. We want everybody to survive this pandemic. And it's like, but that's what we should have said with forced to vote. Because it's like, if you force the vote on Medicare for all and people vote against it, it's like you're killing the American people. You're telling the American people you don't want them to have health care. I mean, and that's why I think that, talking about negotiating from a firmer position, the Green Party's stance in 2020, Howie Hawkins in his platform, it was first we do Medicare for all, then we expand Medicare for all to the point where we nationalize the entire healthcare system. Because what people don't know is that Medicare for all is just for health insurance.
Yes.
So it doesn't get rid of the profit motive in the hospitals and the doctor's offices and every other aspect of the healthcare system.
Yeah.
So, and I saw Ralph Nader tweet a few weeks ago where he said hospital beds in 1975, there was about 1.5 million hospital beds in 1975. Now there's about 800,000. So we've cut the number of hospital beds in this country in half because hospitals are merging together. They're monopolizing together. And so now we have less hospital beds than we used to have, even though the population has gone up. And if you had a public healthcare system, an entirely public healthcare system with no profit motive involved at all, you wouldn't have that problem. And the Green Party's position also was going to create democratically elected boards for these hospitals. So 2/3 would have been from the public and 1/3 would have been the hospital employees. So democratizing the healthcare system. And they want to portray it like we're the ones who are authoritarian, us communist, socialist type people who want to nationalize industries. They portray it like we're the authoritarians. We're trying to democratize these industries.
Yeah. And that's my position. I don't think Medicare for all goes far enough. If anybody watching who's on the right thinks, oh my God, they want to socialize healthcare. No, Medicare for all is not socializing healthcare. I want to socialize healthcare. I want it to be community ran. That's what I want. right? Take the for-profit motive out of it, because every single time you put for-profit motive in something that a human being needs for survival, somebody's going to needlessly die.
Yep. Because it's for greed. It's for money. They're
Yeah.
being driven by money, not by the humanity. They're not being driven by love for people. They're being driven by how much money can I make off of this. That's why they tried to keep pre-existing conditions. They tried to squeeze people out of healthcare with the Affordable Care Act. Before that, the health insurance companies were like, no, we don't want to cover people with pre-existing conditions. They're going to cost us more money. That's how you know it's all about money for them.
Yeah. Thanks, Jude, for the super chat. He said, that's a ridiculous claim. You mean hundreds of candidates scrapped their campaigns and decided not to run because there was no force to vote? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm confused. What is scrapped their campaigns and decided not to run because there was no force to vote? Yeah. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because the ones who were in office just decided not to force the vote. And they decided not to force the vote because, most likely, they are very chummy with the Democrats in power who don't believe in universal health care. They say that they are, but actions speak louder than words.
Well, and the whole thing is I think they fear that if they take a left oppositional stance on these things, well, then the party's going to call them obstructionists and treat them like they're disloyal and they're not in favor of party unity. And I think these progressives seem to think that if they do that, they won't be able to get anything done. They think they'll just be completely marginalized. But when you have 117 co-sponsors, the Affordable Care Act only had 40 co-sponsors when it passed. So it's like they have the numbers. If they would just work as a unit, as a block, using their leverage together. I mean, that's why I think they shouldn't be Democrats. They should leave the Democratic Party entirely and form their own party, because then you're not beholden to this, oh, I need to walk the same line that Joe Manchin's walking, or I need to walk the same line that Joe Biden's walking. Compromise happens in politics all the time, but if you're in a different political party, you say your piece and then you compromise. You don't compromise because you're in the same party and then act like a united front when you're not a united front.
Yeah, it's just like with Pramila Jayapal. She basically already negotiated from a compromised position when she was talking about student debt. She was like, "Oh, relieve $50,000 of student debt." I'm like, "No, all student debt, Pramila, all, and stick to that position, right? At least start there, And if you guys can meet in the middle, okay, but no, all."
And I want to connect that. I want to connect that to how life is like in Sweden and how they do healthcare and student debt, because or it's not even, they don't have student debt. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. In Sweden, when you go to college, anybody of any age can go to college. So when I went here 4 years ago, my first study abroad experience, I had a 60-year-old man in my political science class just because he wanted to learn about this topic, just because he thought it was interesting. And the government gave him a grant to go to school. He got free money to go to school just because he wanted to go to school. And that's how it works for all students in Sweden. There is no tuition. Tuition is completely free. And the government will give you grants for some of your living expenses. Maybe not all of it, but some of it. And so you don't get in debt in that way. It's completely free. When it comes to healthcare, I mean, it's crazy to me how their healthcare works, because it's like, it's good. It's government run for the most part. But I mean, they literally, for a whole year's worth of doctor visits, they cap it at like $100 or $200. So anything over $100 or $200, once you've reached that amount of money for the year that you spent on your doctor's visits, it's all free. For surgeries, I don't know the exact number, but it's like $300, $400 for surgeries. Anything over that's completely free.
Wow.
So whereas in America, you take an ambulance and that costs you like $1,000, $2,000 just for the ambulance to the hospital. It's free here. Or I think there's some places in Sweden that cost like $20, $30. But for the most part, it's free. Yeah. And it's free. $20 or $30 for something that my mom got in a car accident once when I was in high school. She was pinned into the vehicle because she got T-boned. She was fine, luckily. She was just kind of having a mental breakdown when they got her out of the car. But she was begging the police, please don't call me an ambulance. Please don't do that. I can't afford an ambulance. It's too much money. And they compromised. They told her, you know, we need to take you to the hospital. We had to get you out of a pinned car. We'll drive you the speed limit to the hospital, and it'll cost like half the price to go the speed limit to the hospital in an ambulance. And I'm just like, that's insane to me.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I just wanted to answer Jude's question. He said, you made the claim that Forced to Vote was designed to have the Medicare for All fail and have people run against the no votes. Where are the candidates? They just said, nah, never mind, after there was no Forced to Vote.
I mean, I wouldn't say there's no candidates. I mean, I don't know all the candidates. I know there are people who are running to the left of them, whether it's in the Green Party, Independent, there's some Communist Party candidates, there's PSL.
Yeah.
There's people who are going to primary them within the Democratic Party. That's not my preferred approach, but I'd rather have somebody primarying them on a adamantly forced to vote Medicare for all position than, you know, nothing at all. I mean, I think she's basically trying to say that there are some people who've given up on electoralism entirely because of it. And I don't blame people for giving up on electoralism.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, people are frustrated because it doesn't look like any change is coming through Congress. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about the need for a new constitution in America. Because I think that completely connects to the idea of electoralism isn't working. We need a new system.
Mm-hmm. And here's the thing. The thing is that about Forced to Vote, and maybe I should clarify. One of the things about it is Forced to Vote is one of those things where if it fails, you can still make it work. If it wins, it still works.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what, even if it failed. But the thing is, you have to have that vote come to the floor. That was the only requirement. It's just to have the vote to the floor. Even if it got voted down, then you would see what would happen. And you can know essentially who the true enemies of it are.
But what's so frustrating is it's so hard to tell nowadays who the real enemies are and who aren't, because the people who claim to be our allies, people like Cori Bush, and I want to connect this to the March for Medicare for All because I talked about that in my video.
Mm-hmm.
Cori Bush, I tried to interview Cori Bush at the March for Medicare.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Mm-hmm. She just surprisingly showed up. And I thought, oh, wow, that's so cool. It's good that she showed up. Let me go try to talk to her and ask a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
And dumb me didn't do the journalism properly, because instead of just immediately videotaping her and asking her the questions, I walked up and I'm like, hey, Cori, can I interview you? And then she was like, oh, who are you? Who are you with? I'm like, I'm just an independent journalist. I'm just here doing this for myself. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, here, I'll tell you the questions and you can decide if you want to talk about it. Dumb me should have just told her, asked her the questions, because I told her. So the first question is, why'd you show up to the March for Medicare for All today? Easy question. Second question, which was the real question I wanted to ask, was, so how do you respond to your forced to vote critics who think that elected progressives should work together as a bloc to leverage their power for Medicare for All?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, I'll answer the first question for you. I support Medicare for All. I'm here today because, you know, people need health care. It was a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
But then the second question, she wouldn't answer it. And I said, well, why won't you answer the second question? She said, oh, it's just manufactured division. There's more that unites us than divides us. And I'm like, whoa, wait. I've been at this event today interviewing like 6 or 7 people, asking them their opinion on forced to vote, and every single one of them supported it. Every single one of them thinks that they need to fight harder for Medicare for all. So how are you going to tell me it's manufactured division? And so I kind of expressed my frustration to her. We went our separate ways. I was like, whatever, it's done. You know, I'll just go film the event now. Mm-hmm. And so I'm filming the event, and one of the speakers was talking about, oh, we need to stop playing nice with politicians. We need to call them out. We need to fight for fight for the working class, you know, in a truly determined way. And I was starting to feel inspired. Then the next speaker was Savage Joy, another one of our podcasters, and she was talking about how she was 85% blind,
mm-hmm.
you know, how painful this experience was for her, how painful the healthcare system is for her, and why
mm-hmm.
forced to vote was something she took really seriously for that reason. And so because she was bringing up forced to vote, and I know Cori Bush is here, and I know Cori Bush is going to get all these tweets saying, wow, so amazing, Cori Bush showed up at the March for Medicare for All today. But nobody's going to know that she said that forced the vote was manufactured division, and everybody who was participating in these events, most people participating, cared about it. So I yelled out, Cori Bush is here, and she said forced the vote is manufactured division. And she left the event after I said that. She basically just walked away. And then 3 weeks later, when she did the Capitol Hill sit-in to extend the eviction moratorium, Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone, he asked her the very same question. And she gave him the runaround. She basically gave the same answer of, well, there's nothing we could have really done. We don't have the power. It's Pramila Jayapal's bill. It's Bernie Sanders' bill. It's not our bill. There's nothing we could have done. And he was like, oh, well, you could have had Pelosi bring it to the floor, though. And then the security guards come in the way. They're like, Max, we're done here. You got to stop. And I'm like, that's what I was trying to say. That is what they're doing. They're giving us the runaround, acting like they don't have the power to do something that they did.
Yeah. Now, Jude says failure can result in setbacks. True. Everyone mentions women's suffrage, but no one brings up the 2019 Green New Deal vote that the GOP forced and murdered the policy.
Policy's not murdered.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
It's still alive, isn't it? I wouldn't say it's completely murdered.
No, I mean, we're still literally fighting for it. But also, here's this. What's the amount of people that in the Democratic Party that support Medicare for all?
I mean, at least 117 Congress members and 80% of Democrats in polls.
89% of Democrats.
Yeah.
89. A majority of independents support it. And almost 50% of Republicans support Medicare for all. So with that being said, I honestly think that as far as setbacks go, Medicare for all has a lower chance of a setback than the Green New Deal does.
Yeah.
So, and also, here's my point. You miss 100% of the shots you never take. Take the shot. Because here's the thing. They all want to play behind the scenes and work behind the scenes. We have been doing that for 40 years. Where has that gotten us? That has gotten us absolutely nowhere.
And that's the entire strategy of the Democrats, it seems, is that they say one thing that they believe, that they claim to believe, but then they have these private discussions behind the scenes with other politicians, and that kind of drives what they can and can't talk about. Yep. So the reason why Cori Bush goes out there and says, oh, force the vote is just manufactured division, blah, 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 it's because she probably thinks it's like a fourth rail that she's not allowed to touch, because if she touches it, then all of a sudden she's associated with the people who are calling out the Democratic Party, and she's an obstructionist and all these things. And so it's like, they don't want to rock the boat of the party, because rocking the boat of the party gets, there was candidates in 2018 and 2016 who the Democratic establishment like dries up all their funding and ostracizes them from the party and pulls all the inside levers they can to keep them away from power. Maybe they'd lose committee assignments or something like that. But like you said, if you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, make them do that to you. Make them ostracize you. Then you can be like, look what they're doing. I'm over here just fighting for healthcare, and they're pushing me out. Yeah. Because that will show you, it's like you're a martyr at that point.
Yeah, you're creating the evidence. Case in point, back in, I think it was 1994, you saw a young and vibrant Nancy Pelosi arguing for single-payer health care in front of the steps of Congress. What happened?
She became part of the DC bubble. She got absorbed into it.
If that can happen to her, then it stands to reason that it can happen to many other different people.
And it looks like it's already happening. I mean, because we saw AOC, when AOC first got elected, she protested outside of Nancy Pelosi's office. She did a sit-in. And that's why the Green New Deal came onto the scene in the first place, was because of that. But now, between then, 2018, and now, 2020, we've seen them go from, okay, we're going to do the inside-outside game, to now it looks like they're just doing the inside game at this point. There is no collaborating with the social movements and being involved in our discussions. It's like as soon as Jimmy Dore started arguing with them about force the vote and all of Twitter started dividing into these camps about it, they started ignoring everybody in the Jimmy Dore camp. Basically, anybody who was for force the vote kind of got, they're no longer part of the AOC. AOC doesn't see us anymore. AOC doesn't see us as people that we're allowed to be talked to anymore, it feels like.
Yeah. And the thing is that was actually a DSA policy strategy that was to be implemented. And Jimmy Dore just got it from DSA. That was it. E. Heller it makes a great point. Them refusing to even do force to vote was as effective because it showed us who would really fight for us.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to risk your seat for the right to do the right thing, because here's the thing, even if you did that risk, who's going to be behind you? The people are automatically going to be behind you. And so if they try to do anything nefarious to get you out of office or to, smear you, the people know what you did and the people will stand behind you because, people see what you do for them. So that's the thing.
I mean, it's just frustrating because we saw AOC when she ran. She said, I don't care if I'm a one-term congresswoman. I don't care if they squeeze me out like that. I'm here to fight for the people. But now it seems like they're shifting to a strategy of being in Congress for 10 years, being in Congress for 15 years. And in order to do that, you need to play by the rules of the Democratic Party or else they'll force you out and demonize you. And it's like AOC has 11 million Twitter followers or something like that. I mean, they have the platforms to make these discussions mainstream discussions. And instead we're being marginalized. I mean, the Julian Assange case is the perfect example of this because, that's another one of those fourth rails that they're not allowed to touch, that they won't even mention even once. When I talked to Cori Bush's aide outside of the Capitol protest, so me and Frank Analysis tried to interview Cori Bush. When we walked up, all the aides kind of stood in the way of us and stood in the way of the cameras. And we're like, no, Cori's been really busy today interviewing people. We'll do it another time. And so I was talking to one of the aides and I said, well, why isn't Cori saying anything about Julian Assange? And the aide kind of said, well, she's really busy fighting for a lot of political prisoners right now, like Stephen Dozinger. And so, maybe she'll get to it eventually. And it's like, so it's on their radar. They clearly know this exists. I've emailed Bernie Sanders. I've emailed my congressman, Jamie Raskin, my senator, Ben Cardin, my other senator, Chris Van Hollen. No word back from any of them. I've called them a few times. No word back from any of them. No public statements from any of them. You have Jeremy Corbyn in England, who people used to compare to Bernie Sanders because they're both democratic socialists. Jeremy Corbyn's out there on the front lines. At the Belmarsh Tribunal yesterday, they had a whole bunch of speakers who are elected representatives and big figures from around the world talking about the Julian Assange case. But you won't see any Democrat touch it at all. And it's like they do it because they think it's too politically risky to talk about because their shit-lib supporters think that Julian Assange is involved in a Russian plot to throw the election to Trump in 2016. And I think that's exactly why they won't talk about it, because they don't want to alienate those voters who think that. And Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, even 2 or 3 years ago, called out Donald Trump for putting these charges against Assange. They actually spoke out about it. So when I formed my letter to Bernie, I basically said, you said something about it in 2018. Now Biden is appealing the case and it's continuing to go forward. Can we hear an updated position? Do you still believe what you said in 2018, basically? And nothing. Somebody confronted him at a rally once a year ago. Nothing.
Yeah. And just to, I think we can transition to that next, but as far as the rest of this reconciliation bill is concerned, it's silly because it's now down to 1.2 trillion.
Wow, is that like today or yesterday type of thing? I thought it was 1.75.
No, it's down to 1.2. It keeps going lower and lower and lower. Like, are we even going to get an infrastructure bill? Are we?
I mean, I think they should call the bluff and just vote. If Manchin's willing to vote no, why aren't we willing to vote no if it's not enough? And I know why they aren't, because it's a harm reduction perspective. They think that if they vote no, well, at least 1.2 is better than 0. But I think my whole thing is, well, if it gets 0, if it doesn't pass at all, Biden's approval rating is going to tank from 40% where it is now to like 25 or 30%. And the pressure will be on for the next bill to be way better than this one. Whereas if they pass the 1.5 or 1.2 or whatever it is, then Biden can say, see, look, guys, I got this Build Back Better Act passed, and my agenda is going on full steam. And then they continue to not, because now they've dealt with the issue, right? Now we've passed a big transformational bill. So now we'll wait till after the midterms to do something else. Vote for us because we need you to help us to do more.
Yeah. Look, I'll put it this way. This is going to be a little bit of a pushback, but I honestly think the goal is not to win. The goal is never to win. It's part of that ratchet effect that we always talk about. It's basically the good cop, bad cop. And Biden is counting on losing. He's counting on it. Because if he truly wanted to win, he would listen to more of the left, but he doesn't want to. He's so stuck on appeasing his corporate donors, his masters, the people who bribe him, that it's like, you know what? No, we're gonna go this route because then it's easier to push our agenda with a Republican administration than it is with a Democratic one. We're just here to make ourselves look so bad that people will go to the worst side to think that they're doing something better, and then every single time it comes time for them to get tired of the Republicans, we're there to remind them how worse the Democrats are, so then they can keep going back to even worse.
Well, then the helpful thing for them, for that strategy for them, is that, so let's just say the 2022 midterms happen, the Republicans retake the House. Well, now they have a convenient boogeyman to say, well, see, look, we couldn't do it because now we have these 10 Republicans who are standing in the way. Because right now the boogeyman, what's the rotating villain at the moment, is Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But after they lose the midterms, the rotating villain will be the Republicans. And so they'll have to say, well, look, we need to vote more Democrats in 2024 to take back the House from these Republicans. Then they're going to get a narrow 2-seat majority again. And, well, a 2-seat majority, when you have all these corporate Democrats in the party, they're just Republicans. They act the same way. So, and then it just continues on and on and on and on. They can keep just saying, oh, it's those people's fault. It's not our party's fault. It's those people's fault, even though they're part of the party.
Yeah. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm like only inches away from any type of political action at all. That's why I mostly believe in just doing mildly like local politics, running for city council and things like that. Anything else, I just feel like it's not worth it right now. That's why I'm more of a firmer believer in direct action.
That's how you really change people's minds, because when it comes to, if you focus all of your energy on electoralism, especially if your electoralism is Democrat electoralism like we're seeing right now, even DSA electoralism like we're seeing now, then you don't change anything that way. Nothing. You just continue the same system with a new person in the seat. Whereas if you're doing direct action, if you're protesting and drawing attention to something that they're ignoring, well, now you've thrown a wrench into the system that the system has to now process, right? So you've brought something to the table that the person that you get through electoralism, they're not going to bring that to the table at all. And I think that connects to the whole need for a new constitution, because we can keep putting more people into this system as much as we want, but if the system doesn't fundamentally include basic human rights in the system itself, that person is just going to go out there and represent what the system is. They're just going to go out there and work within the confines of what it already is. Yeah. And so if we don't change the confines of what is, nothing changes.
Okay. So hold on. Okay, so you say you like to thank Fred Hampton Leftists for ruining any hope in your heart for the left ever gaining any power in this country. And you sarcastically say good work. So okay, I'm gonna keep myself as measured and calm as possible with this. Um, so as we have been seeing, as far as electoral politics is concerned, most of it has been a result of a fool's errand because every single time we engage in it, then nothing happens. We constantly get shit on because of how we on the left are treated. We're constantly treated as the villain. We are constantly vilified. Look at my friend Liv. She got arrested because she was carrying a bat for protection for the water protectors at a rally for, you know, opposing Line 3. If somebody was a right winger with an AK-47, they probably wouldn't have even been stopped. They probably just got a wink and a nod from the police. What we're doing and what we aim to do is to push more means of direct action and mutual aid and gaining more power through that. Because if you can get the numbers and people in the streets, then that will be the best way because they're not listening to us any other way. So we're basically going back to a more heavier hand in direct action. Now, I'm not saying that absolutely no electoral politics is necessary. I'm saying we take an 80-20 approach. That being said, my focus is going to be mostly on direct action. If you feel that we're not the platform for you, that's very fine, and I wish you well. But what we're talking about is going back to the same model that the socialist and communist parties of the 1940s have went. We're going back to the same model that ones like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X had, because they worked. And so that's how we're doing it.
And I want to respond to the idea of, our type of politics killing, hope. Because I actually look at it as this has made me more optimistic about the ability that people have to actually change things. Because if you're just giving donations to politicians, if you're just expecting your leaders like that to change things for you, things are not going to change. When I see, so imagine if the Black Lives Matter movement, which was good movement, good protest, it got a lot of attention, right? Mm-hmm. Imagine if they had firmer demands in that movement, kind of like Chile had for their new constitution movement that they had. They were assaulted by police in the streets for months and months and months, and hundreds of thousands of people kept turning out and turning out and turning out. 30 people were killed by the police in those protests in Chile. But what happened as a result? Their corporate bought-off Republican president was forced to put a national referendum up for a vote for a new constitution. That referendum passed. And that referendum made it so that they're having a constitutional convention for a new constitution, 50% of which has to be women, 20 of the seats have to be indigenous people. And that party, the president who put it up for a vote, he was hoping that 33% of the seats would be his conservative party. And he didn't even get that because the movement was so powerful that it changed people's minds, that it pulled the country to the left. And so the whole thing is, we're not saying, give up on any sort of policy entirely. We talk about policy all the time. We just don't talk about policy in terms of electoralism as much. We're talking about pressuring for the policies directly, regardless of who's sitting in that seat, because you can pressure. I mean, Joe Biden is not any better than Donald Trump. Joe Biden is just as firm about supporting the corporate line as Donald Trump was. But the difference was with Donald Trump, the streets were filled with people protesting all of the things that he was doing. So it actually was pressuring the system, whereas now Joe Biden, there's nobody in the streets anymore. So nobody's demanding anything more because they trust their leader. Their leader will bring them the salvation. But that's not how it works. Change happens because we demand the change in the streets through direct action, through mutual aid, through strikes, through a general strike. And so if we actually focus more of our energy on organizing the community, and I have hope that most people agree with us on Medicare for all. Most people agree with us that police brutality is terrible and racism is prevalent throughout the entire country, and everybody should have student debt. People agree with us on these ideas when you actually explain it to them. So instead of putting all of our energy on building these political parties to do that for us, we should be doing it ourselves. Each individual person has the ability to do that themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so, Jude, what the hell? Take that for what you will. But thank you very much for your comment. Colin, my homie Colin, he said, people forget that the Congressional Progressive Caucus technically makes up a quarter of the House. If they did their jobs, Manchin and Sinema would be irrelevant.
They outnumber them.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that. It was great. Thank you.
I just wonder what the internal politics must be like for those people in the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Like, I wonder if there are people who believe what we're saying right now, but they're too scared because of the collective not doing it, so they feel stuck to the line that the leadership is taking. Like, I wonder if they have these types of internal squabbles that we're having right now. I wonder if they have them amongst themselves and we just don't see it.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about that.
Oh, geez. Now you turn it into a debate, bro. Okay. All right. Thanks for coming. So, yeah, let's get into the subject. Hang on. Because we're trying to answer it, Nick. That's why I just wanted to answer it. But yeah, so the case against Julian Assange, he's being held up in a Belmarsh prison, because we're switching gears now. Yeah, so what is new with that now? Because I know that people like yourself, Comrade Misty, you guys talk a lot about Julian Assange and the precedent that it would set if he were to be brought back to the United States to face a trial. Well, would it even be a trial? I don't even think it'd be more like a kangaroo court at this point. But what new that you have been hearing on the ground?
So there's nothing super new. I mean, we'll get to the really big news that broke like 2 or 3 weeks ago. But basically, so this week on the 27th and 28th, that's when they're having the appeal trial, because the charges were dropped earlier this year, completely dropped, because the judge wasn't willing to send Julian Assange to the United States because the mental health condition that Julian Assange is in, he was a risk of suicide if they sent him to the United States, and because that he wouldn't face a fair trial in the United States, because as we've already seen, the CIA bugged his room in the embassy. The CIA had an inside agent within a Spanish security firm, or Spanish surveillance firm that they didn't know, or that the Ecuadorian government had contracted. And he was bugging all the rooms around the embassy to spy on Julian Assange. They spied on his private conversations with his lawyers, which that's illegal. And they even spied on the bathrooms that he was in. And so then, now we had the recent news that broke 3 weeks ago, and it wasn't even new. Actually, it was just Yahoo News confirming what the Gray Zone had reported on a year ago, that the CIA under Trump and Pompeo was trying to assassinate Julian, or they discussed the idea of assassinating or kidnapping Julian Assange, because they claimed that the Russian government was going to try to sneak Assange out of the embassy. And if the government had done that, they were saying that there would be gun battles on the street of London to capture Assange, to send him to the United States. That is how far the CIA was going with this plot. They spied on him, and they threatened to assassinate or kidnap him. And Mike Pompeo, after that news story broke, he kind of said, well, don't believe everything you read in the news. But those people who said that thing, they should all be arrested because they're speaking about classified information, because it was intelligence agents who confirmed this was discussed. He said they broke, because you're not allowed to talk about classified information. There's confidentiality and things like that. So he said they should all be charged. It's not true, but they should all be charged because it is true.
Yeah.
So it's just the precedent that it'll set, to get to that other question. The precedent that it'll set is that any journalist who is working with a source, a whistleblower who has taken classified information, it will make it so that that journalist can be charged under the Espionage Act. Because the Espionage Act has only ever gone against whistleblowers, people like Chelsea Manning, people like Edward Snowden, people who worked in the government and took those documents themselves and publicized them. Now they're trying to expand it to Julian Assange, who is a publisher, and it has never happened before. They actually tried to charge Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers that showed a bunch of war crimes in, Vietnam. And one of the reasons that charge got dropped against him, besides the fact that he was just a journalist, was that the government had done sneaky things to him too. The CIA had tried to spy on him and get him in that type of way too, which was why it was completely invalidated. And Daniel Ellsberg speaks out for Julian Assange now because he recognizes that this is the same as his case. The New York Times worked with Julian Assange on publicizing those Iraq war documents. The Washington Post did. Der Spiegel in Germany worked with Julian Assange on publishing those documents. He's won journalism awards. To say he's not a journalist is like, what?
Yeah. So unfortunately, this, puts us at a point where if the United States can, punish him for basically being a journalist, then they can punish any journalist for being a journalist. They can punish anybody from the gray zone, like Max Blumenthal or Aaron Mate, for the type of work that they do. They can, my co-host from Hampton, Leftist, Nick, they can punish him. They can punish me. They can punish you just for speaking out against what the United States may be doing, and and investigating on it or talking about it.
And it's international in scope too. So it's not even just us. It's like Julian Assange is from Australia. He's an Australian citizen. He's never been to I don't know if he's never been, but he doesn't live here. He's not a citizen of the United States. So the United States government wants international authority on charging journalists for their work. So how can you care about Jamal Khashoggi when he gets killed by Saudi Arabia, but now they're killing Julian Assange? He was in the embassy for 8 years. He's been in prison for 2 or 3 years. They're trying to charge him with 175 years in prison. I mean, that's a death sentence at that point.
Yeah. And the point about the United States trying to basically have dominion over the entire earth, where's the lie? And what does that actually start? It started a long time ago. I want to thank Jeeves for the $10 super chat. I'm way into the name Pro Peace Report. What does that look like to be pro peace in 2021 and on? If you'd like to answer that question.
I mean, I think it's really about opposing imperialism and militarism. I think those are the two really, really big keys to actually being pro-peace. There's a lot of people who will say, oh, I support peace. But then they also support things like U.S. sanctions on countries like Cuba, on countries like Nicaragua, on countries like Iran, on countries like North Korea. They support these sanctions all around the world. But those are imperialist sanctions that we're putting on those governments to starve their people into revolution. We're trying to antagonize these governments or these people in these countries, the poor people, so that they'll overthrow a government we consider to be authoritarian. And so I think being pro-peace requires not just standing against wars, not just standing against sanctions, but standing against like any attempt to interfere in other countries in a way that harms their people. Because the people who support these wars, the people who support these sanctions, they claim to support human rights. They claim that they're the ones on the side of the peace, and these evil dictators over here, they're the ones who are against peace. But like, I'm currently studying human rights studies in a master's degree program. I see how people talk about sanctions and how they think that sanctions are just punishing countries for wrongdoing. But they're completely ignoring the fact that those sanctions harm the people in those countries. And so I think being pro-peace means you have to stand against imperialism and militarism.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for answering that. Now the one thing that I was honestly, well, we actually moved pretty quickly through it. Because we talked about Medicare for all versus nationalizing healthcare. We covered at length the Democrats failing on the reconciliation bill, and we did pretty good on the Assange trial.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of new details on the Assange trial to talk about yet. I do plan on, it's on the 27th and 28th. I'm hoping to do a live stream where I watch the trial itself on live stream and kind of talk about it on stream so that people can translate what's being talked about in court and so people will know exactly what's being talked about. But not much has really changed other than that CIA assassination story. That was the biggest news that broke that even the mainstream media started covering.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And as far as what Chile has done to change or ratify their constitution, number one is wonderful. It's brilliant. But at the same time, it gives us the idea here in the United States that if they can do it, why can't we? I know at least one amendment that needs to be, ratified, and that's the 13th Amendment, because we should not allow for any slavery whatsoever under any circumstances in the United States. No. Unfortunately, the 13th Amendment still allows for that.
I mean, there's so many things, though, that, like, our Constitution is missing that, like, I mean, because like I've said before, the idea that if we keep this current Constitution, we're going to constantly be electing people who interpret it in a way that allows for capitalist exploitation, that allows for poor people to die. This Constitution is the same Constitution that allowed slavery to happen. This Constitution is the same Constitution that allows them to impoverish millions of people and deprive us of health care and pollute the environment and all sorts of other things. And so as long as we have this Constitution, you'll be allowed to have political parties who believe in fascist things because there's nothing in the Constitution stopping fascism from happening. So they are just interpreting the Constitution as it exists, and that allows for that. Yep. Whereas if we change the Constitution, if you put the right to clean water, the right to health care, the right to housing in the Constitution itself, the people trying to deprive us of those things can't do it because the courts will interpret it as being against the Constitution. I don't think Americans know. I'm just now starting to research other countries' constitutions. I mean, the Constitution in Kenya includes the right to health care, includes the right to housing, adequate housing in their constitutions. The right to clean environment is in constitutions. In Chile, one of the things that they've criticized about the Pinochet constitution was that it privatized water. So water drinking water is privatized in Chile. So a lot of activists running in the Constitutional Convention to change it, they want to make it a public utility because it's water. Everybody should have the right to water. And so things like that, if we don't put them in the Constitution, they're political. They're just politicized. They're just Democrats and Republicans argue about it. Conservatives are allowed to deprive us of those things because there's nothing in the Constitution that allows for them. And I think it comes down to like the Declaration of Independence too. So I have like a quote here from the Declaration of Independence that completely connects to it because we can't rely on the Constitution for this because the Constitution doesn't include these things, right? We have to go back to the Declaration of Independence, I think, to start making this claim that this Constitution is invalid. Because it says that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, men, doesn't include women, doesn't include non-binary, but that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. And so that right there tells us that the people who founded this country in the first place retained the right for us to get rid of it entirely when it no longer serves us anymore. And I think that's the type of thing that we need to move towards, because it doesn't include all of these rights that we just outlined. It still has slavery in it. They've amended the Constitution so that it doesn't have the 3/5 rule, but the 3/5 rule is still written in this Constitution we use, that black people are only 3/5 of a person. That's in this document still. And so it's like, it's not unusual for countries to make new constitutions and change them as generations go on. But for some reason in this country, we seem to hold on to this Constitution we have as if it was like a holy document that's unchangeable.
It wasn't ordained by God or some entity. It was basically written by men. So, I mean, it can be changed and it can be improved over time. Sulamoon asked, what do you think about the Great Reset?
I'm not that informed on the Great Reset, to be honest. I've heard it a little bit. I know it's all of the corporations and around the world are talking about trying to restructure capitalism to save capitalism and to, things like that. But I don't know the details enough to really speak to my opinion about it. Because on face value, when you look at all the actors who are involved in it, it sounds nefarious, right? But I don't know enough to speak to the details.
I'm looking at it right now a little bit. And from what I can tell, as far as the Great Reset is concerned, I'm not trying to save capitalism.
No.
Capitalism can burn and fire. I want to push it into oblivion, because it's been doing nothing but harming people for the last 400 or 500 years. It can go. I
mean, FDR wanted to save capitalism, and his politics resulted in Japanese internment camps. It resulted in not fully listening to the socialists and communists. The only reason that FDR was able to actually do some of the more transformative things that he gets credit for is because there were big socialist and communist and labor union movements at that moment demanding it. People who were trying to move beyond capitalism were the ones who pulled FDR in that direction. FDR was just trying to cut them off and prevent them from truly succeeding in moving beyond capitalism.
Where Pilgrim made a good point. It's interesting that it's so difficult to make the U.S. Constitution a living document or to adapt it to modern needs and times. Imagine if most of our society was still frozen in the 18th century framing.
I mean, we are in a lot of ways. People still, and it's so crazy because when we look at other countries that try to institute socialism, that call themselves communist, it's like the U.S. government only focuses on, we think they're authoritarian, they're nationalizing their resources, they're not letting U.S. oil companies come in and profit off of it anymore. That's so terrible. That's what they say about Venezuela. That's what they say about Cuba and places like that. And it's like they don't properly teach us how those people talk about socialism and communism. You never hear the Cuban side of the story. You never hear the Chinese side of the story. You never hear the Nicaraguan side of the story. So everybody's perception of what socialism means in those countries is from Venezuela is a terrible, horrible place and you're just a dictator supporter. That's the only narrative that the American people are actually hearing about these topics. And that's why we have the perspectives that we do. If we were properly educated on those things, I don't think people would think what they think today. Because there are socialists who think that Sweden is socialist. And I'm in here, I live in Sweden, I talk to Swedish socialists, and they will say, no, Sweden is not socialist. In some ways, Sweden's corporate tax rate is lower than the United States corporate tax rate. They actually have a more free market in a lot of ways. They're just capitalism's attempt to save itself. That's why they instituted the welfare net in the first place, was because, if you give people health care and you give people education, and you give them, they have 400 days of maternity and paternity leave. So that's crazy. That's the most in the world. But when you give them this welfare system, now all of a sudden they're not blaming the capitalists anymore. Now they feel like they have it good. There's still homelessness. There are still people who die in Sweden. You still have capitalists who control the means of production and workers who are subservient to them. But it's just a more advanced form of capitalism. It's where capitalism is heading in the direction of. They have 80% union membership in Sweden, which sounds good. Unions are good. People don't realize unions are not necessarily socialism, because unions are the workers negotiating with the bosses. So it maintains this dynamic of capitalists are above the workers, but it gives them more bargaining power. But even if you talk to, I talked to a Swedish Marxist who told me the labor union member or leadership in Sweden is kind of corrupt. You know, they do what the bosses want them to do. There's no way to recall union leaders, so there's elections every year or two, but you can't get rid of the leader if you don't like them in between that time period. There's not elections for every. The workers in Sweden don't vote on whether they go on strike. The leadership decides when the union goes on strike. And so that's what people don't understand, is that Sweden, in comparison to the US, in some ways might seem more socialist just because they have more government-run programs. But that's not what distinguishes socialist and communist countries. I think it's really about their ideological outlook that really distinguishes what is a socialist or communist country.
Got it. Thank you from Jeeves. So I wanted to elaborate on pro-peace a little bit more. Dennis Kucinich, when he campaigned, talked about having a federal Department of Peace. Can we be more proactive in that way?
I mean, I like the idea. I know Marianne Williamson also has floated the idea. What I'd be worried about is, what does the Department of Peace do? Because I could imagine a scenario where if we still have the Department of Peace, but we also have the Department of Defense and the Pentagon and everybody working together, you might see that the Department of Peace that they'll create will accuse other countries of being human rights violators, accuse other countries of being authoritarian, which will then justify sanctions, which will then justify eventual military action. So I'd like to see a Department of Peace in terms of diplomacy, in terms of talking to these other countries and talking about our human rights problems and our concerns about their human rights abuses. But where I draw the line is I don't want our Department of Peace to help the military, to help efforts of imperialism. But I do like the idea of a Department of Peace. If it is genuinely about peace, if it is genuinely about dialogue with North Korea, genuinely about dialogue with China, instead of warmongering, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
What do you think about Department of Peace, JB?
I think that should be the primary department that we defer to for all diplomatic relations. Diplomacy is a very powerful tool when used correctly. Instead of punishing nations, maybe we can help nations to improve and use that as the means to help them do better. Because then if they do better, and if their people are doing better, then it's better for all of us overall. This whole sanctioning the hell out of different countries, the United States treats other countries the way it treats people in our prison system. They don't believe in restorative justice at all.
It's a carceral mindset. It's the idea that in order to make this country bend to our will, we are going to economically cripple that country until they bend to our will. And it doesn't work. What you end up seeing is that we're sanctioning like 40 countries at the moment. And what you see is the countries we sanction work together. They form their own block of countries and trade amongst themselves and do diplomacy amongst themselves to form as a counterforce against us. And they tell their people, in Venezuela, 70% of their oil profits used to go to social programs. Since the U.S. sanctions took place, it's only less than 1% now. So Maduro can go out to his people and say, I'm not the one who's depriving you of food. I'm not the one who's depriving you of medicine. It's the U.S. sanctions that are doing it. And it's true. So it actually ends up backfiring on whatever the capitalists believe. The capitalists think that they're doing it to call attention to a human rights abuse, and all it does is make them look like human rights abusers. Like if we were having dialogue, if we actually sat down and talked to Kim Jong-un, if we said, okay, we're going to pause our military drills and let's talk. And yeah, you can still raise your human rights concerns or whatever you think they're doing wrong, and they'll raise what they think we're doing wrong too, right? And so maybe you can have a mutual conversation about, we think you're doing this wrong, we think you're doing this wrong. But if you don't have a carceral coercive method there, you could actually get something done. We could help them. We could give them money to solve some of these human rights abuses we think they're having. But if you deprive them of that money, you're just impoverishing the people even more and making whatever human rights abuse we claim is happening worse.
Yeah. You know, so that whole point about my brain, it went through again. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't do drugs, kids. No, it's not.
Maybe just a little.
Yeah.
We can talk about that if you want to talk about the legalization of drugs and the ethics of legalizing drugs. And I think that's a very relevant human rights problem around the world. In Sweden, people don't know this about Sweden. Sweden sounds like it's this socialist utopia. Their war on drugs is like just as bad or worse than the United States. They have a very carceral mindset when it comes to drug use in Sweden. So I had a friend in 2017, 2018, when he was here. They went to a DreamHack convention, a video game convention in Jönköping, and they were outside smoking a cigarette, talking about drugs. They were joking with each other about drugs. Police overhear this conversation about drugs, come over and accuse them of doing drugs. They had nothing on them. There was no drugs in possession on them. But they're allowed to, in Sweden, drug test you if they suspect you of drug use. In the United States, it's possession that gets you in trouble. In Sweden, if you have weed in your system, it gets you in trouble. So you could have smoked a joint a month ago, and you'd still get in trouble. You get like a $400 fine. And even the left party in Sweden, Vänsterpartiet, they tweeted something out like a week or two ago where they had said that, oh, we need to cut off drug use at the source by cracking down on the gangs that sell them. You know, so it's like they're still stuck in a carceral mindset.
Yeah. Speaking of drugs, I'm going to be showing you this one. So, oh boy, here we go. This is actually, somebody who is very deeply into the carceral state and putting people in prison for drug use, among other things. So let's get your thoughts on it.
The election of who will be governor of Virginia has an impact on who will be where around the state. I love Democrats and I love democracy. So, hey guys, let's focus on why we're all here right now. We're here right now. We're here right now to make sure Terry McCullough is elected the next governor of the great state and the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we will not be distracted. We will not be dissuaded. We will not be deterred. This election is too important. You want to know what matters in terms of who's governor?
I think you're muted, JB.
Yeah. So yeah, that happened. Miss Do Not Come. Miss Cackling.
I mean, she's just like screaming at activists, environmental activists, indigenous rights activists who want to stop an oil pipeline. Like it makes, I don't understand. I mean, I do understand actually. Yeah. But like I was going to say, I don't understand why politicians think it's a good response when protesters are raising a valid concern, why they think it's a good idea to just shout over them and get aggressively angry and just drown out their voices. Now, I know why they do it. It's because they don't agree with stopping Line 3. It's because their oil donors, because their big money donors don't want them to speak out and give voice to that. But imagine if she had instead handed them the microphone, let them come in. Maybe after the event, she goes and talks to them about their concerns. But no, it's just shouting them down and saying, oh, I love Democrats, implying that, they don't even know if those people are Democrats, for one. But it's like, it's just crazy. I can believe it, but it shocks me every time politicians, Democrats, people who claim to support environmentalism, people who claim to want to stop climate change, they don't confront those issues head on.
Yeah. So you saw the point where her frustration set in and her voice heightened, and she even went up a couple octaves there, because the thing is that if one thing you notice about her is that she's very, very scripted. And if things go and take her off that script, she gets very frustrated. She has to have things set in place. She's a prosecutor by nature, and that's how she operates. And so for people to come out, for those brave people, indigenous people especially, to stop Line 3, that threw her off her game. And she had to try to wiggle her way back in. You saw her struggling.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they were getting to her, number one, great job. Wonderful job. Number two, that got a lot of people's attention on Googling what's Line 3.
That's exactly the type of direct action we need. Yeah. We need direct action that you need to catch them off guard. You need to do it in a way that'll get media attention. Because the whole thing is, she's saying, oh, we're not here for that. We're here to talk about Terry McAuliffe. And it's like, but there's never a time where Kamala Harris is going to be willing to talk about Line 3, right? You're never going to catch her in a moment where she's willing to actually talk about it. So you need to, at an event, bird dog, call out what you want called attention to. And there's no way it can be ignored in that scenario. If you do it strategically enough, like they did there, they clearly had enough people. And Line 3 has been really good about that. The activists for Line 3, I've seen them do that to the governor of Minnesota. I've seen them do that to Amy Klobuchar. That's how you have to get them, catch them on the spot so that there's no way they can run and hide from what you're saying to them. And that's why I called out Cori Bush at the March for Medicare for All. Because it's like, when you catch politicians doing something like that at a moment where they cannot run and hide, they either have to respond to your concerns or run and hide. And either solution tells you what their stance is.
You know what a leftist would have done in Kamala's position? Number one, they would have never supported Line 3. Number two, if they would have been saying stop Line 3, I would have said, and yes, we're also going to work to stop Line 3. And I would have included that in the speech. And then they all would have probably started cheering.
Yep.
And then you probably could have got them on your side. But because she's beholden to these fossil fuel companies, she's not going to do that. And so they knew that. And so they were doing that to trip her up. And the thing is that and I've said it many times before, you have to make the comfortable uncomfortable. If you're not willing to make the comfortable uncomfortable, then you're going to stay in discomfort because they will not know what it feels like to be in discomfort. You have to let them know how uncomfortable you are. Because if you do, then it'll push them to change. You have to force their hand. There's no, it's like what I gave a speech at the Medicare for All March. You can please, the word please should not be in your vocabulary when it comes to dealing with politicians. Not when you're the boss, not when they are the subordinate. They are the subordinate, not you.
So, I mean, it's just crazy because they claim to care about environmentalism. And I think Biden finally shot down the Keystone XL earlier this year. And a lot of Democrats came out against that. But it's like, they're not consistent with it. They're against this pipeline, but they are not saying anything about this pipeline and this and that. And it's like, you can't get them down to a consistent stance on the issue. They claim to support indigenous rights, but this pipeline is going to go through wild rice fields where indigenous tribes in the region get their food. And the treaty that they've signed says that they get to decide what happens on areas that impact their natural resources.
Mm-hmm.
And pipelines leak. We all know that pipelines leak. Like, it's not a whether if, it's like when. We know they're going to leak, but when is it going to happen? There's another one that never gets any attention that I wish got talked about more. I should talk about it more. The Colonial Pipeline in North Carolina. It's already built. It's not being built. But last year it spilled like 1.4 million gallons of oil. And so at first they said, oh, it's 200,000. Then a week later, they're like, oh, well, it's actually 500,000 gallons. And now they're saying it could be even more than 1.4 million. It's the biggest oil spill, I think, in modern U.S. history of an oil pipeline. Did you ever hear about it on the news? Did anybody ever tell us that this was happening? No, I've only ever heard it from, his name's Robbie. I can't remember his last name, but he's friends with Comrade Misty, and that's how I heard about it. I've never seen it in any corporate media.
Yeah, because they don't want. Look, there's a Democrat. It's a Democratic administration. They're not going to talk about it. Now, let Trump have approved it, and then
they'd be shouting.
Yeah, they were shouting. It's wrong. Whatever administration is in power, it shouldn't be there. But that goes into the whole system that even the mainstream media has, where they also kind of play the good cop, bad cop game too. Because mainstream media benefit greatly from Trump, but now they're running cover for Biden. So it's just...
They called Biden, they would say that Biden was truthful. During the election, they'd be like, Trump is just a unique liar. He's like, a crazy liar out of nowhere. And I was like, yeah, Trump is a liar, but so is Joe Biden. And I think if you polled the American people, most people would say that Joe Biden is not honest. And so it's like, I hate that like double standard of, and that's how, and this connects to like something I've thought about for a long time. Cause like my bachelor's degree was in journalism and political science. And so I've always been thinking about the idea of media bias. And, they always talked about, that people would say, oh, CNN and MSNBC are liberal media and Fox News is conservative media. And it's like, well, that's not true at all, because they're all kind of conservative media. If you think about it, they're all capitalist media at the end of the day. Yeah. But it would always blow my mind, because you listen to these media outlets and they pretend to be fair and honest and objective. Objective journalism is a term that frustrates me so much, because I don't think it exists. That's like my idea of journalism, is that there's always a bias. No matter what, we are biased human beings. We have our own political outlooks. Yeah. Even this podcast right now, what we're deciding to talk about, what we're deciding not to talk about, that's the agenda you set when you cover something like that, all determines your bias. And you could be saying something completely honest. You could be saying something completely factual, but the information you use and the information you exclude kind of tells you what the bias of something is. And people need to be aware that nobody is unbiased. You just have to pick through the bullshit and find out what's honest and what's not. And that's connecting it to Julian Assange. That's why I hate government secrecy so much, because if politicians know everything and we only know some things, then we are not capable of making fully objective opinions on things, right? Because we're only being given what they're letting us see. They're making the decisions off of things and saying, trust us. We've seen the classified information. We know this thing is a fact. But we know they've lied to us when they say that too, with like Iraq War WMD, for example, or James Clapper saying under oath to the NSA, or the NSA director, he was saying, oh, we're not spying on a citizens' mass collection of their data, not wittingly. So we know they lie about things that are classified information.
Not willingly.
I hate it so much, because then the media parrots the information. The media never investigates whether what they're saying is actually true. And when they say something's classified and we can't tell you, the media just goes, oh, it's a national security issue. Trust them. They know what they're talking about. They've seen the stuff that we haven't seen, instead of asking to see the things that we can't see.
Yeah. Um, especially when you get to the point where they are the whole like secrecy. They say it's because well we need to secrecy to defend ourselves. And my question is to defend ourselves from what?
Yeah.
Because the United States seems to always be the aggressor completely. And they'll be like, well, there's terrorists in other nations, and I'm like, are they terrorists? Are they just trying to get you out of their country?
Yeah. I mean, terrorist is such a fickle word to define because one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, and it's very ideological and subjective who considers what which.
Yeah, yeah. And then they'll talk about, well, when 9/11 happened, you know, there were these men that came in. Number one, they came from Saudi Arabia, not Afghanistan. I think only one of them was Afghanistan. The other 11 were Saudi Arabian. But yet we still are, pets for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that's one point. And then they'll go, well, we had to go to Iraq because there was WMDs. That was a lie.
Mhm.
And then a couple days ago, last week, Colin Powell dies and everybody's praising him.
Mhm.
One point that I wanted to make about that, especially regarding Colin Powell, is that Colin Powell is actually more of a mass murderer than the 9/11 attackers. How do I know this? Colin Powell had a hand in killing over millions of Iraqis. The 9/11 attackers killed about 3,000. Which one
Yeah.
killed more? So, are they all war criminals? Yes, they all are war criminals. But the foremost among them that died was Colin Powell. And
Mhm.
people will probably be like, no, he was an American hero. Try asking the people in the Southeast and the Middle East about what Colin Powell did and how if he's a hero or not to them. So
And that's what's so frustrating about media bias, like we were just talking about. They only tell us the US perspective of the story. Our
mhm,
media that claims to be perfectly objective, they'll only tell us what our politicians tell us, and they'll never tell us what the other country's people are saying. They don't tell you the story from the perspective of the Iraqi soldier, or the Iraqi citizen. They only tell you the story from the perspective of the US general, from the CIA, from the military. And that's why people think Colin Powell is an amazing person, a great man, and all this stuff, because our media doesn't tell us the story of the person who was tortured in Guantanamo Bay. The
mhm,
media doesn't tell us. They addressed Julian Assange, who told us some of these stories.
yeah,
So it is like a purposeful cover up. And like
and
when you were saying earlier about hiding information because we need to keep ourselves safe, that's what the government says.
mhm,
But who are they keeping safe by not releasing the JFK files? You know what I mean? They're still keeping information on JFK's assassination classified. They were supposed to release it like this past week, even more. They haven't done it yet. Who are they
yeah,
keeping safe in that scenario? Probably the CIA, because the CIA is probably the one who murdered JFK. They don't want to tell us that because as soon as they tell us that, all trust in the CIA evaporates. And that means anything the CIA is doing abroad, the American people will no longer trust, right? And so
yeah,
that's a national security issue to them because distrust
yeah,
in the CIA will damage our national security. That's how it connects. But it's like, we deserve to know who killed JFK. We
yeah.
deserve to know. I used to live near Fort Detrick in Maryland, a top secret bioweapons military base in the US, basically.
Ooh,
And one of the programs they did there, you've probably heard of it, MK Ultra, where they would drug people with LSD to extract and torture them and extract information out of them through that program. They didn't tell us the truth about that program for decades. They did a slow drip. They gave us some documents 10 years later. They gave us some documents 20 years later. They destroyed half the documents. And that's what they do. When information is classified, there might be some scenarios where it's genuinely classified to keep somebody safe, but like 90% of the time, it seems like it's just because they know they fucked up.
interesting quote by Colin Powell. If kill is good, overkill is better. God, that's so fascistic. Oh my
Yeah.
God,
I
that's
was like, how do you
fascistic
just
as hell.
blatantly say that? Like,
Oh, it reminds me of Madeleine Albright when you talk about 500,000 children. I think it was Iraqi children that were killed. Was it?
Mhm.
And she basically said it was worth it. Like that's monstrous. That's
Yeah.
monstrous thinking.
And
You
that's the type
know?
of things that all of our politicians and all of our secretaries of state would say. I remember Hillary Clinton when Muammar Gaddafi got killed, and she said, "We came, he saw, he died," and she started laughing about him getting assassinated. And
Yeah.
it's like, I just don't see. It's so frustrating to me that more people don't realize like what our politicians really do. They just basically trust whatever they're told that they do, and it's just I don't even
Oh,
know.
hold up. He didn't. I made it up.
I mean, it's believable enough, right?
That's the sad part. The sad part is that
Yeah.
it is believable.
Yeah.
Because I mean, yeah, he may have not said it, but his actions prove that statement, unfortunately. Because
Mm.
I mean, they could have just said, well, the attackers were killed and they were Saudi, and we will hold, Saudi Arabia, accountable for the actions of what these men did, and we demanded they have an investigation, blah blah blah, and that could have been it, and we wouldn't have went to war in Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the other 7 countries that were, the 5 countries that we were bombing. And by the way, we're still in Afghanistan. I don't care what nobody says, because as long as we still have drones going in the sky, or even if we still have sanctions, we're still at war in Afghanistan. Just like we're still at war in places like Germany. We're still at war in Korea, but we're just not
I
actively
mean, it's
fighting.
so frustrating when it comes to drones, because people pretend as though, or they treat it as though drones are not actually war. They think of it as more of like a police crackdown type of thing. But it's like, so let's imagine the scenario. I've seen a picture of like a graph or like a circle, the circle of the war on terror.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically like, okay, so US drops a drone strike. That drone strike kills 5 civilians.
Mm-hmm.
The families of those 5 civilians are, let's just say, 30 people. Now those 30 people hate the United States. And so some of those 30 people organize against the United States. We do another drone strike. We kill more innocent people. Now, 20 years later, you have a new Taliban in Afghanistan, right? Or a new version of the Taliban.
Mm-hmm.
And we put boots back on the ground because now these people hate America so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally they beat us. They fight off the invaders, right? And they take their country back. But we keep doing the drone strikes. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. That's how the military-industrial complex keeps their endless war going, because the war never ends. Even if you're not boots on the ground, they're still doing drone strikes. They're still radicalizing people by killing innocent people. And it just goes on and on and on.
A perpetual endless cycle.
Yeah.
That,
The U.S. has only been at peace like 5 years of our existence. Like, literally, we've been at war constantly.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it.
Because we are the global hegemon of the world. We are the military empire of the world. And the only way to maintain our military empire, in our eyes, is to overthrow countries that won't give us their money, that won't give us their resources.
You know what? You have a good point. I'm not going to say we. I'm going to say they, because, yeah, I don't vote for that, BS, and I don't support that.
I only
BS.
say we in the sense that, like, I am an American citizen, right? So technically, we would be the collective American citizen. I am not in the camp of the Democrats and Republicans and the capitalists and the imperialists.
Yeah,
that's more they, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, I take that critique with a grain of salt, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I mean, here's the thing: when it comes to like being brainwashed, what's so frustrating about like that idea is that like anybody who doesn't agree with your bias is going to think you're brainwashed. You know what I mean? The Democrats and Republicans are going to think we're brainwashed. We think they're brainwashed. Democrats think Republicans are brainwashed. Like, anytime you don't agree with a person, you think that they've formed their opinion through brainwashing. That's what like everybody seems to do.
Yeah, but what would you say to people who what would you say to somebody if they were using objective fact to prove their ideology, and those facts came out to be categorically true? Would that be brainwashed? It's like, you can, I know there's a thing called confirmation bias when these
Hmm.
things happen, and sometimes people cherry pick them. But when you get to a point where there's overwhelming evidence of something and yet you still don't accept it, that's somebody who's brainwashed. But for those of us who see overwhelming evidence, i.e., the destruction that capitalism has brought over the last, couple of centuries at least, um, and yet we're still being called brainwashed for it. It's almost like it's a mental, it's a projection. Is that they are brainwashed, projecting that onto us because they refuse to believe that the United States doesn't do anything or has been anything but nefarious.
Well, it's like
You
that's where
know?
you get down to like the interpretation people have of objective reality. Because, for example, there are Democrats who would admit that there was nefarious stuff happening in the 2016 primary. They would admit that there was rigging, or they wouldn't call it rigging, right? They'd admit that Donna Brazile gave debate questions to Hillary Clinton. They'll admit that the media was colluding with the Democratic Party to smear Bernie. What they won't admit is that that comes to the term rigging. They don't admit that it rises to that level, but they agree on objective facts. And that's where it gets so difficult to educate people, to persuade people to our opinion, because when you can be talking an objective fact, but the way that people spin their facts is usually through their ideological lens, right? So we all agree on a certain fact, but to a Democrat, this thing is overplayed, it's overhyped, you're overreacting. To a Republican, it's, oh my gosh, this pants on fire, So it's like, that's where it gets so difficult, I think, to get people, like people would say that there's only one objective reality, and there is only one objective reality, but everybody is so ideological in their own interpretation. I don't know. That's where I get kind of like trippy and like big brained, and I can't even like wrap my mind around it, because it's like two people can be saying completely true things, but spinning it in a completely opposite direction. And that's where it gets tough, because there's so much information in the world and we can all access the same information, but maybe all my information is true and maybe all of your information is true, but I don't know yours and you don't know mine, so I think you're brainwashed when really you're just working with a different set of facts. And that's what this age of like information overload is doing to us, where it's like you can always find facts that confirm your bias, right? Like you were saying, confirmation bias. The facts exist. It's just that people are interpreting them incorrectly. You could say they're spinning a fact to be something that it's not.
So Jamie Dysel, they are both brainwashed in different types. I'm sorry, in different ways, but they're all brainwashed in American exceptionalism. That's just a given. You're not allowed to argue about that with either side.
It's true. I mean, what's frustrating is there are liberals out there who think that they don't believe in American exceptionalism. Like they'd say that they don't believe in American exceptionalism, but then when it comes to their actions, it seems to speak otherwise. So like they'll say, oh, I'm not an American exceptionalist, but I vote for the Democratic Party who does these imperialist sanctions and wars around the world and acts like an exceptionalist. So it's like there's a disconnect for a lot of people. This is where I'm actually like empathetic with working class people who are brainwashed, you could say, because it's like sometimes they genuinely believe the leftist opinion on something, but they don't understand how their actions are not in line with that, right? So they genuinely think they believe in healthcare for everybody. They genuinely believe they think that everybody should have education and police are bad and all these sorts of things. But then they keep voting for the people who do the exact opposite over and over and over. And convincing them not to do that is difficult because they can't get their mind out of electoralism. They can't get their mind out of duopoly mindset.
Yeah. I think that number one, there needs to be a humility as far as the mindset of those of us here in the United States. But also, I think that there shouldn't be a exceptionalism among us at all. I think, I mean, if anything, we can have an earthling exceptionalism, because I mean, look at the what's the word I want to use? Look at the biodiversity we have, look at the type of climate that we have, look at the, the different species that we possess, and look at what humans can do. I mean, that type of exceptionalism and being proud of ourselves for what we can do, then yeah, of course. But really, who do we have to compare ourselves to? Nobody.
Mm.
So we can still have that exceptionalism without it being dangerous. Um,
That's where I like the idea of internationalism over nationalism.
mhm,
Like, there are times where I understand nationalism, like when it's a self-determination movement, people trying to free themselves from colonization. Like, it
mhm,
makes sense to be nationalist in that sense because we're being ruled by colonists, right? We're being oppressed, so we need to free our nation. I understand it in that setting. But
mhm,
overall, I think we should be internationalist in our scope, not nationalist,
mhm,
because humans are all facing, no matter what side of a border you're on, we're all facing similar human rights problems, right? There's lack of healthcare, there's lack of education, there's poverty everywhere, there's war, governments are abusing people. That's something that unites people, I think, around the world.
mhm.
But if we're nationalists, if we say, no, you can't come here, you can't come to our country, but we're allowed to overthrow your country. You know what I mean? That's how American nationalism works. The American exceptionalism works. So it's like it's okay to be happy about the place you live in, to love the people that live where you live, but people need to get more internationalist in their scope, I think, so that we're not only thinking of ourselves. That's a
Yeah,
big American problem, I think. There's not very much internationalism, and there's a lot of nationalism.
yeah. Actually, Colin, you actually brought something to my mind, and thank you very much. You said, as DJ Nice says, internationalize the struggle. Do we, as American leftists, have this underlying opinion of American exceptionalism of ourselves? That's a question I've been wondering about,
How so?
because
Like, how would you interpret it? What's your interpretation of that?
are are we expressing more international solidarity with other leftists, or are we not giving them as much regard as we should? Uh,
Mm.
because I honestly think the leftist movement has to be an international one. Capitalism is worldwide, it's not nationwide. So, therefore, in order to beat capitalism, you have to unite with other leftists around the world
Mm-hmm.
in order to help it to happen. But it seems as if, like, are we teaming up with people who are in France who are leftists, or are we teaming up with people who are in Gambia who are leftists, or in Indonesian leftists? Are we really willing to have solidarity with them? Um, and I defer to when the Black Panthers expressed solidarity with Palestinians, in Gaza,
Some of them
because of
went to
what,
North Korea too.
yeah, and Cuba, and they, expressed their solidarity with them as leftists. I would love to see more of an internationalization, as Colin thankfully brought out, that we come together as,
Mm.
it's almost like taking all leftists and making it one nation of leftists that are spread abroad. You know what I mean?
Mm. No, I think that's a great idea. I mean, that's what we have to do. I mean, like, an international law, tons of flaws. Totally flawed in the sense that international law is like a
Hmm.
rules-based order that's built by the United States and the superpowers of the world. Like, there are huge flaws when it comes to international law. But when it comes to things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, when it
Hmm.
comes to like the way that it gives us a platform to communicate with people all around the world about human rights problems that we're all simultaneously facing. Like, I don't think Americans give it enough credit. Like, instead, we make it so that United States citizens can't even be sent to The Hague for international war crimes. The U.S. would invade the Netherlands if our people were sent to there. And it's like, I think we definitely need to be collaborating more with, and that's something I want to do more myself. I don't necessarily know always how, but that's why I try so hard to normalize countries like or China and Russia and North Korea, because there are leftists in those countries. We don't want just war, U.S. imperialist war on those countries. We want to know what the people in those countries are saying so that we can support their human rights claims. So it's like, I don't know how we do it. I think the Communist Party, and I'm not in it, I don't know much about like how their internal workings are, but I know they do have, international collaboration with other countries' communist parties. The Green Party has international collaboration with other countries' green parties. There was, when socialists and communists and anarchists, they've had, 4 internationals now, where they have like an international meeting to decide on priorities for the global left movement. So it's like these things have existed, and they still do exist. It's just, how do we get more people to plug into it, right? Because I'm not even fully plugged into those things. And I know these issues, and I'm starting to understand the international side of things. But it's like, how do we get more people plugged in and involved? And I think that U.S. imperialism is counterproductive in that regard, because you have NGOs going to other countries, and those NGOs have good intentions sometimes, maybe, but they're trying to antagonize for regime change. They're trying to overthrow the country of that government. So how does that government respond? That government kicks out all of the NGOs and says, we're not going to let international organizations into our country anymore because we're scared they're going to overthrow us. So it's like there's that fine line that we almost have to walk, where it's like, we want to help them in their struggle against their authoritarian governments, definitely. But like, if you go too far in doing that, you're pushing imperialism on them, and you are basically making their country cut off communication. They make it so that international human rights organizations who are apolitical, who are not involved in anything like that, even they're not being allowed into some countries because their government is scared of U.S. imperialism. So it's like a really fine line there.
Yeah, that's true.
And one last thing, sorry. One last thing, because Colin brought it up, and me and Colin and DJ Nice Joe, we had talked about this in another podcast, where the March for Medicare for All was sending a human rights claim to the United Nations, a complaint about America depriving us of healthcare. And like stuff like that is more of what we should be doing. Like Julian Assange, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, spoke up for Julian Assange, the internationalized movement.
Yeah, and one of the things I appreciate, Nick, Socialist MMA, he has a show called International Leftist Coalition that he does on Tuesday evenings. I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday evenings on FHL. And so, he has highly educated and deeply in tuned leftists that teach about international leftism. And so this is one of the things that we as the Western left need to hone in on, is the solidarity, because as you know, we just added a couple of new FHL members, one of them being Kamali, another one being Josana. Josana is originally from Brazil, and she wants to get us more connected with Brazilian leftists. So this is that interlocking with different leftists from other areas, so that we can see how they're doing things in their country, and they can see if we have something to benefit them. They can see how we're doing things here, and we can have kind of an exchange of dialogue to see what works best for us, so that we can do a more smoother shift out of capitalism. And by smoother shift, I mean less burden on ourselves, so that we can tackle capitalism more head on.
Yeah, so that we're not running around in circles, not solving the problem, so that we're not beating our head on the wall with strategies that aren't working, but we're figuring out what works in other countries for their movements to move beyond capitalism, and trying to emulate that here in our Americanized version.
Yeah. And so, and even looking like, God, sometimes you wish you can have a Castro online or somebody like that, or um, oh my goodness, or I'm blanking on his name. I can't believe I just blanked on his name. He
Who?
is so awesome. Um,
Oh, I said who. It's like you blanked on his name. What country? Who are you thinking of?
uh,
Context clues.
think thinking China. Um,
Mao Zedong.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, if only we can talk to people like Mao or Castro, you know, and get their opinion on how things were done and what did they say and things like that, because you would say they were largely successful. So, um,
I mean,
as
yeah, I
long.
think international collaboration. I want to watch that roundtable more. I've actually been like a little bit out of the podcast loop lately. I've been focused on schoolwork, Twitter, other things, just not watching podcasts as much. But I mean,
Mhm.
it's a great idea because I do think we do need more international collaboration on things like that. It was
Mhm.
learning about other countries and the things they have and the things that we don't and the things they think about us. That's what really helped me evolve in my leftist politics. Because it's
Mhm.
like you see all these countries around the world have these basic human rights that the United States, the richest country in the world, doesn't have. They tell us we can't afford these things. We're the richest country in the history of the world. And
Yeah.
like our imperialism is hurting the world more than anybody else. So we need to hear the opinions of the world because they are impacted by what happens here. Our decisions impact their decisions.
Mhm.
And it's like, if we can learn the strategies that work for them and collaborate with them, we'd be able to hopefully actually bring change here.
Mhm.
I mean, internationalism is how things have always worked. People pretend like there was a point in history where things were just nationalized, but it's like
Mhm.
there's always been international collaboration. The United States, the government, the revolution that we had, the American Revolution, relied on support from abroad for it to succeed. The Civil War, when the Union beat the Confederacy, there was international support that helped finish that thing. So there's always an international scope to things.
Mhm. Yeah.
We are Rome on steroids.
Basically,
Literally.
yeah. I
I mean,
mean,
French Revolution had less inequality than the United States has right now. That's how bad it is. Like,
it's almost kind of like you want to put like the French Revolution like facts on TV. Like if Anonymous can like hack into like all the mainstream media and local media and just like show it, hack into YouTube and just show everybody and be like, they were actually less worse off than you guys. What are you going to do about it? And then it just kind of
well, we need
pushes
like
people.
that's why we need internationalist politicians who are willing to say things like that. I think
Yeah,
too many politicians in America are just kind of strictly nationalist,
yeah.
and maybe not nationalist in the sense they wouldn't call themselves nationalist, but nationalist in the sense that they only talk about things from an American perspective.
Hang on. What are your thoughts on CPUSA?
I mean,
Um,
I like the Communist Party. I mean, I don't know everything about them, so I can't give like a comprehensive opinion. I like communism, so I think that it's good to have a communist party. I've heard that they do collaborate with other communist parties. I
yes.
did actually look at their website the other day. There was one thing in their charter that I kind of didn't like so much, which was the idea that you can't publicly make criticisms of the party. If you're having an internal dispute within the party
Mm-hmm.
and they make a decision that you don't agree with,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of says you're expected to not publicly state your disagreement with the decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something I necessarily agree with, but that's I don't want to hyperinflate that problem as if that's the whole party. I'm just speaking off of
Mm-hmm.
uninformed opinion. I
Yeah.
want to have a communist party in the United States gain popularity because I think that would help
Yeah.
educate more people if we
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. I agree with that. I I am not a communist as of yet, but I deeply respect the opinions and the ideology of my communist comrades.
Mm.
They are brilliant, and their primary focus is, humanity first. Um, and so I'm down with that. Um, have I evolved to communism? Not yet. I don't
What's
say that
keeping you back? What are you like curious to learn more about that would help you evolve to that point?
I feel like communism is it's the paradise that is not obtainable as of yet. I can see it maybe like a couple of 100 years down the future, but we have to get to socialism first. But even still,
I think many communists would agree with you on that, though, because it's like,
yeah.
so let's look at China. Look at China as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So China calls themselves communist. They're ruled by the Communist Party. But even China admits they're not even going to be a socialist country until the year 2050. That's their goal, is to be socialist by 2050.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost like that's a distinguishing feature between communists and anarchists, is that I think communists understand we can't get to the stateless, classless society tomorrow. They look at it more as like class struggle as a process, and it takes time to work through the class struggle. Yeah. Whereas it's like anarchists kind of want to jump to the end goal. They want to go straight to a classless, stateless society. That's kind of like a distinguishing difference. But I get what you mean, because even I don't think we can necessarily get to the point where states don't exist and class doesn't exist and everybody's resources are allocated properly so that we don't have people dying in poverty. Because that's like a difference between, let's say, libertarianism and anarchism. Is that libertarians want to get rid of the state, but they have no solution to inequality, right? They have no solution to making sure everybody's basic needs are met. It's I've got mine and I'm going to do what I want to do. Yeah. Whereas somebody who's like an anarchist, they want no state, but they want everybody's basic needs to be met. And then communists agree with the anarchists, but communists maybe think that it's more of a process, whereas anarchists are much more to the point, you could say. But I don't know, that's just my interpretation. It's so, the theory is so complex. I mean, I think I understand a good amount, but it's still just a surface level understanding of things.
Yeah, it's a surface level for me. And I think that ultimately it's like the goal, for a stateless, classless society is awesome. But we have to work towards it. But I see, okay, here's my analogy. I see a mountain and I see communism as the summit, the tippy top of the mountain. And I'm like 2/3 of the way up that mountain, but I haven't reached that summit yet. That's kind of how I liken it.
Break out the theory books. Try reading on it more. It's so hard. Like reading theory, I do like reading theory. I think it's good. It's taught me a lot, but it can be so difficult because there's so much of it. You don't know who to read and who not to read. You don't know. You have to read 1,000-word or 1,000-page book. You know, and it's like so much complications to it. That's why I have ADHD, so I like listening to other people explain theory, and I watch videos, and I try to see, okay, so what are these people saying in theory, and then how are they playing it out in practice? Because I was confused too of thinking that communism meant getting to stateless, classless society tomorrow at one point. But then I looked at China, and China hasn't done that, right? So people would say, oh, well, China's not even communist because China, still has a state and they still have police and they still do those things. And it's like, that's because they're not there yet. You know what I mean? That's because they are theoretically communists. Their ideal is communism. But there has not been a stateless, classless society yet, unless we're thinking of ancient communism. When you think of tribal communism, you think of like tribes that didn't have states and didn't have money. You know what I mean? So communism existed at one point in time in human history, but it's in this society today, it would look different.
Yeah,
I want a Quaker socialist. What's your disagreement? Because I want to learn. I want to understand the anarchist disagreement with what I said.
She was disagreeing with Jean.
Oh.
Jean had said anarchy doesn't work in a society unless you want a warlord world. People need to feel safe. That's
I don't agree with that.
And Quaker Socialist says she basically disagrees. But yeah, I'm at the point right now where I'm still learning, and actually we have an idea regarding theory. I'm talking it right about that idea with Nick. Um, and so
What's the idea? You
one,
guys gonna do like a reading or something, like videos?
God damn it, Kobe.
I beat you to the punchline. I'm sorry.
I wasn't gonna talk about it. But yeah, I'm thinking about doing something that's kind of like that. So that because we've said before that people like myself didn't need to read theory in order to get to the position that I'm in because we lived it. However, reading theory is also good because then you can put it into practice so that you're able to be more educated and teach people the ins and outs of this type of ideology. Because, and people will say, well, I don't believe in labels and people are being too labeled too much. The thing is that you don't know what something is unless it has a classification.
Yeah. Just like academic, you need to know. Like labels there are people who arbitrarily use labels, right? So labels are misused.
Yes,
I remember I read something once by George Orwell about how words like democracy and authoritarian and freedom, they become meaningless at a certain point because people use them for all sorts of things. But there are academic definitions of things like anarchist, communist, socialist, capitalist. Like there are definitions to those things. And that's why I use labels personally.
Yeah.
I don't think you should overuse labels maybe, but I do think there's a place for them because like you're saying, we can avoid having the same problems. There are people who are right now working through the same problems that people have worked through 100 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You know, we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. It's good that you did, and I have to a certain point gotten to a certain understanding of this leftist politics without reading as much theory as some people. But it's like you can sharpen it so much more, right? Because you can fix. There might be a question that you have in your head that somebody's already solved, but you don't know they've solved it because you haven't read it yet. And like,
exactly.
Kind of where I'm at with theory.
Yeah. So that's my thing. It's I want to be able to do that to hone my understanding so that I can be better educator. I also can connect to more people who have read it, and maybe I can explain theory in a way that will help others so that they're able to come to an easier conclusion. And so that's one of the things. And part of being someone that's on the left is educating people to let them know that number one, they have rights just by virtue of being a human being. And number two, educating them on how, you know, those rights should be pursued and how they are viable and why a capitalist system is deadly and dangerous to them and how, you know, they can stay away from the brainwashing that capitalism employs. So that's one of the
fall victim to the brainwashing when you don't have a theoretical background, right? Because you won't know. Somebody who's read theory might know that this one talking point is something that was already talked about before and has already been refuted. But if you don't know that, you might accidentally fall into it because you don't know any better. It sounds reasonable, right? You know, It's like for me, the way one of the things that helped me learn theory a lot. It wasn't just reading some theory, but it's okay. So this person has read a lot of theory. They call themselves this. What is their praxis? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I see people call themselves communist, and well, I kind of like those people more than I like the people who are calling themselves liberals, right? So once I started getting to that point of, well, I'm not a Democrat. I don't like liberalism. I think I'm a socialist. But then when you become a socialist, then communists are saying to you, well, you know, socialism is the path to communism, right? And that you can't be a socialist and both be a capitalist or whatever. You know what I mean? And so it's like through those conversations and through those interactions with people, and like I protested with anarchists during the Black Lives Matter protest. I learned why they wanted to abolish the police. That was an idea I had never wrapped my mind around until that point. But once I wrapped my mind around the idea of why they believe in abolishing the police and how you get there, then it was all of a sudden like, oh, light bulbs going off in my head. I think I understand why anarchists are anarchists more now. Like it makes sense to me because I see how it plays. for me, learning the way it plays out in praxis is what helped me get to theory in the
Yeah,
first place.
yeah. And when I decided to call myself a socialist, I did it according to the definition of what a socialist is. Because a lot of people have this misconception that socialism is when the government does stuff. And I'm like, no, I literally want the workers and the community to own the means of production, to own the factories, the restaurants, the mills, all this other stuff collectively, and be able to have a say on how it operates so that it betters their life, not the lives of just a few,
Mm.
and be able to distribute it to everyone if it is something that they need to live or survive. And it has to apply to the tenets of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Mm.
You know, if it is a catalyst for life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness, then it should be provided for.
Mm. That
And so,
misconception you were talking about with people thinking that the government doing things is socialism, that's one of the critiques I do have. And Bernie taught me. Bernie's the one who brought me to socialism in the first place, I would say. Like, I already had some of these ideas in my head, but he helped me really narrow it down. But Bernie perpetuates a myth that, like I said earlier in this podcast, that Sweden is socialist and that our idea of socialism basically just replicates what they do. And it's like, well, yeah, Sweden has a welfare system, like we said, right? You know, they get the government doing stuff, the government doing more to help poor people. But like you said, the workers aren't controlling the means of production. You know, they maybe have a better welfare system. They have more safety nets in place. And it was socialists in Sweden who helped make that happen in the first place. But they haven't crossed the line into being considered a socialist country.
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure that if I'm going to call myself a particular ideology, that my beliefs are tied to the literal definition of it. I don't want to be socialist adjacent. I want to be a socialist. You know what I mean? So that's really where
we've got a lot of Americans like that, I think, who think that they're socialists, right? They call themselves socialist, but then in the action, it doesn't necessarily line up. And so it's good in a way that Bernie helped normalize the word, right? That just by Bernie calling himself a democratic socialist, even if he's not always acting in such a way, it did help destigmatize it to millions of people. So now I feel like our job is to, like, for the people who've been destigmatized, but they aren't quite there yet, you know, educating them so that, because they already want to be socialist, right? Some people want to be communist. Some people want to be these labels. They think that they're these labels. So it's about closing the gap between, like, what they conceive of it and the dictionary definitions.
Yeah, it's just, you know, and even to use the word democratic socialist is kind of misleading because, number one, socialism by definition is democratic.
Yeah.
Number one.
It's a redundant term.
Yeah. And number two, if we're going to be real, Bernie is just a capitalist that wants heavy regulation. That's it.
Yep.
That's really all it is.
He's a Swedish social democrat. In the European sense of things, Bernie would be a social democrat. So he would be, even though he calls himself a socialist, and I think that maybe deep down Bernie really does think of himself as that, and that maybe his politics is different than what he genuinely thought his entire life growing up. I don't know. But his actions in Congress and the policies he supports and the countries he calls socialist and wants to emulate are European social democracy, really.
Yeah. But then there are questions, can you be socially conservative, but then economically, you know, socialist? That's a good question.
I think there are people who are that. I think there are people out there who are communist, but maybe they don't fully understand trans rights. Maybe they don't fully agree with, maybe they're homophobic, maybe they're sexist, maybe they're racist. I do think those people exist. You know, there are people in America who think of themselves as communist, but they think of it as like a patriotic communism. So they haven't quite gotten the internationalism into their heads yet. You know what I mean? So it's like there are people are weird, right? People are illogical. No two people are exactly the same. People have conglomerated these ideas together that don't make sense to us, but make sense in their head somehow, you know, so it's like really interesting. I think it is possible to be that. I don't think it should be possible. I think that to be communist, you really should, or just be socialist, you really should not be homophobic. You shouldn't be racist. You shouldn't be, I think there should be intersectionality to these things, right? Because to unite the working class, to fight the capitalists, we can't be racist, because then we're just falling into the trap that the capitalists have set for us to fight amongst ourselves over race, gender, class, everything else. You know what I mean? We need to find a way to get those people to not be those things anymore.
Yeah. And so I think there's so many different nuances to people regarding how they view the world that has to be kind of a deeper conversation, person to person.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting. This is coming into my brain, about, because there was a guy that was running in the Republican Party as a Republican socialist.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, and he was talking about family values and God, but he was implementing kind of like almost like a social democrat or social Republican type of spin to it. And it was interesting. And I was just like, well, are there socialists who have more of a conservative mindset socially? Are there communists that have more of a socially conservative mindset, even though economically they, believe in, communism? And it's interesting. I just, and that's not for a question for any of us to answer, because if we experience it, then we'll see it, and then we can ask that person, about their beliefs and things like that, and how does it square and intersect with their economic values.
I
But
feel like the
that's just
important
something.
thing about that is, like, that's how you know that we shouldn't just be trying to persuade Democrats, right? Because there are a lot of people who think that they can only persuade Democrats to be socialist or communist, and they won't even talk to a Republican because of a conglomeration of all the systems of oppression that they might support. But to
Yeah.
me, it's like, I know some people who think of themselves as conservative, but they understand maybe economics. Maybe they call themselves, I do know somebody who calls himself a communist who seems socially conservative in ways that make me uncomfortable. But it's like,
Wow. Okay.
they claim to believe in communism. They claim to support communism, but then
Wow.
they don't understand trans athletes or something. You know what I mean? So it's
Mhm.
like, there are those people out there, or there are people who are Republicans maybe, and they understand that the Democrats rigged the 2016 election. They understand that Hillary Clinton's a war criminal and all these things, but then they, for some reason, haven't unpacked that Donald Trump is all of those things too, right? So it's like, that's what made me start to open up to the idea of, like, and Malcolm X saying that, liberals will stab you in the back, conservatives will stab you in the stomach. You can see conservatives are basically just like blatantly in front of you. Whatever you see is what you get, right?
Yeah.
Whereas liberals are often sneaky. You can't fully figure out what they believe sometimes. So it's like, that's when I started to open my mind to the idea, because I used to always think of liberals as being the lesser of two evils. I didn't vote Democrat. I just thought they were the lesser of two evils. And I'm almost getting to the point now where, like, when it comes, I can see that it's just two different types of evil. It's not that one's greater or lesser. It's just that it's different sides of things in different ways. It's been a trip for me to wrap my mind around it in that way.
Yeah. I even know how I got into this brain, this question, but it just came up, and it would be a very long conversation.
Yeah.
I just wanted to hang on. Somebody said something in the chat that I wanted to bring up. I know we're over time.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Somebody said something about. Somebody said that they were a Christian socialist.
I saw that too.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't MLK, wasn't MLK technically a Christian socialist?
Yes. I'm friends, on FHL with a Christian socialist. His name is Jabari Morris. He is, he's also teaches people MMT, but he is a devout Christian, but he's also a socialist. And that's a whole nother conversation I want to have about people who are religious that are on the left. intersect your religion with socialism. Intersect, especially if you're Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, intersect that with your leftist ideology. And because when you're talking to a lot of people, because a lot of people in the United States are religious, um, use that as well. Make that your tool in your arsenal to defeat this austerity driven, you know, hate driven, conservatism that rules in the United States.
That's one
Because
of the things that's always made me disagree with, you could say, hardcore atheist leftists. The type of atheist leftists who think that you can't be both communist and religious because what Karl Marx said that religion's the opium of the masses.
Mhm.
And it's like, I don't think that religion should be necessarily like put in the state, right? We want a separation of church and state. But that doesn't mean that they can't use the morality of their religion to uplift socialist values, right? I'm not anti-religion. I'm agnostic personally. I'm not atheist. I don't disbelieve. I don't believe. I'm kind of just, I don't know what happens after you die, right? So I just kind of, I like to read about all of the religions and kind of take something out of them for myself from all of them to learn from. But yeah, I mean, I think religion can be a tool for the left.
Yeah.
Definitely. I don't think it needs to be pushed out of a leftist movement or anything like that, like some people think.
Yeah, and so that's a whole nother discussion for another time. I don't want to keep going too long because we can
It's okay.
go.
It's been, we're 16 minutes over time.
Yeah, we can go a whole another hour over.
I can talk about. I mean, I'm on Twitter all day. You see me. I talk about this stuff all day. So obviously, we could talk about it forever.
Yeah, I might tweet something out about this, but this was a great conversation, man. Like whenever we get together, it's just like,
It's like we started with about an hour and a half of planned topics, and then just kind of
and
conversation come out.
And the people in the chat, our friends in the chat, they input so much, and of course I wasn't able to get to every single one of them because there was some things that we need to that we answered, and I was staying on that for a little bit, and it's just people in the chat, man, they are brilliant, and they teach you so much. And this is one of the reasons why I love having an interactive program versus, because how some on what I like to call the legacy left, they'll just upload recordings all day and they very rarely ever go live. We decided to flip the script where we always go live and then we rarely do pre-recorded, because it's important to get input from the viewer, because there's a lot of stuff that they can teach you that we wouldn't even know, or it wouldn't have came into our brains. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative of all these people in the chat.
Do you ever worry?
Do you
ever worry about the day when you guys get so big that you're getting so many comments that you won't be able to keep up with them anymore? That'll be a disappointing day. Because I like feedback too. Like I've noticed that with my Twitter account. Like it was much easier to give every single person that talks to me interaction when I only had 1,000 followers or something. But now I'm up at like 5,500, and I still try. I basically do keep up with everybody, but sometimes if I tweet something that gets too many notifications, I just like close Twitter and like it's too much. You know what I mean? But like your guys have a good sweet spot now. I mean, it's not too bad. 88 watching, 138. Like that's manageable. Once you get to like I don't even know, like trying to think of a comparison.
Jimmy Dore numbers? Oh my god.
Yeah, Jimmy Dore numbers would be hard to keep up with. When I'm watching Jimmy Dore's live stream, I don't think he'd be able to keep up with the chat quite as easily.
No, but it's
you gotta try. Interaction is good.
Yeah, but it's even difficult on Twitter because you have 5,000. I have over 25,000. And I'm just like, I get so many notifications. I'm just like, I can't answer them all. And I try, but it's difficult. The one person who I'm concerned about is Nick. He has over 60,000. And I'm just like, dude, it's just impossible. So you do the best you can, but with what you got. But I still want to keep this as interactive as possible because
that's a good idea.
people's voices matter. Not just the person who I'm sharing the screen with, but the people who are watching as well.
Mm.
Because as people on the left, I'm a socialist. I think you said you're a socialist as well. Um, we believe in cooperation and collaboration, but I don't believe in it just between other people who have their own channel. I also believe in cooperation and collaboration with the viewer as well.
Yes.
And so this is what separates us from the rest. And I am, I'm just amazed that all these people are here to listen to any word I have to say, because I'm just like I'm just some poor schlub in his room in the hood, and I'm just talking. So I'm
That's
just
what
humbled.
I've loved about learning politics, learning some politics on Twitter, because like I can maybe just say a not fully formed opinion out into the world, and a bunch of people will come in and clarify or correct something or give me a piece of the story that I maybe didn't consider before, or like, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's helpful. I learn a lot just from maybe I say a stupid thing on Twitter that I shouldn't have said or I didn't know fully about, and then people inform me. And if I'm wrong, I'll see that I'm wrong. But a lot of journalists are kind of in the ivory tower, you could say, where it is like looking down at us, not with us.
Yeah, yeah. So, and I think that we try to apply leftist values as much as possible. It
Hmm.
actually gives me good, um, a good question for another story next time. Maybe we can talk about it next time.
Yeah, maybe
About
save it in your head because otherwise we'll talk for the next
yeah,
20 minutes. I do got to go
yeah,
too.
yeah, and I got to make dinner. But
Same.
so I already put your Twitter and the link to your channel in the
Hmm.
description already.
Perfect.
So just to let everybody know, where can they find you?
Yep. And then maybe, yeah, it's what you put my Twitter handle and my YouTube link. I mean, that's
Mhm.
pretty much all I am, where I am these days. I've made a Facebook for my podcast and I've made a Twitch, but I haven't really gotten around to using them much.
Mhm.
Kind of just doing it as like a hobby at the moment, just because I'm at college. I've got a lot of schoolwork I have to do, getting
Mhm.
situated here in Sweden. So podcasting is not something I do full time necessarily, but I try my best. I like to be into independent journalism and political commentary and things like that. But yeah,
Mhm.
Twitter is probably the best place where anybody could find me.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. And for be sure to check out all the rest of our content that's going to
Yeah.
be happening over the week. Tomorrow night we're going to be having again the FHO Monday roundtable. Remember, now we're doing two roundtables a week, so be sure to tune in for that. I'm trying to see because I completely forgot who I have next week.
Mm.
The the gentle rambler, Robert De Blasio, will be joining me next week.
Mm. Nice.
He has a podcast, and so we'll be discussing some of the news of the week with him. So be sure to catch me live, catch me outside. How about that? Sorry, it was a little joke. I'm
No, it's
corny.
okay.
Corny dad jokes. I got them all. But Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'll try to keep it, to my 2 hour window as much as possible. But who knows? We might end up talking a little bit more because you know how we do. I
That
also
just reminds me one thing. I am doing tomorrow, I think at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
Mhm.
Like we said earlier in the podcast, that debate with somebody from DSA in Michigan, I want to say, just a regular member who
Okay.
disagrees with force the vote, who thinks that working within the Democratic Party is the right approach. We're going to be debating those topics tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. It'll be at my YouTube channel in the link below.
Okay. Awesome. And thank you to everybody that is on Rockfin watching. Alexandra, Kyle, Jebediah. Thank you so much for watching on Rockfin. And this basically has been our program. Thank you for watching the JB Show live on FHL, and we will see you in the next one.
Peace out.